Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today I'm going to talk to you about a couple of books which are actually based on reality and also a couple of recent reality shows. If you're anything like me after the Christmas period of having to be super sociable and keep everybody entertained and happy for a period of at least 10 days, I really like to switch off with a bit of good, easy reality TV. But firstly, onto the books. Now, I like to read when I'm traveling. I really like to just completely lose myself in a book on a flight. But it has to be easy reading. I mean, it has to capture me, but it can't have anything dark. So if I'm reading some kind of true crime or anything dark, I don't like to read that on a plane. I like to kind of feel as though I'm in a pretty safe world when I'm on a plane. However, the book I was reading did turn quite take some quite dark turns. I started to read Britney Spears' autobiography on my way over to the UK this Christmas, and I actually read it in about 3 days in the end. Now, I didn't have strong opinions on Britney before I read the book. I know she's a cultural icon. I wasn't the biggest fan of her voice. I wasn't the biggest fan of how, as a very young girl, she'd been kind of sold as a sex symbol, and I felt a bit uncomfortable about that. Obviously, then she had her very, very difficult times, which I did feel sympathy for. But I didn't really have too much of an opinion. My strongest opinion was that we should never do this to kids, turn them into these megastars, and then expect them to know how to handle the world as an adult. And I felt very sad that she was constantly being ridiculed when she was going through really difficult times rather than supported. So that was kind of really where my thoughts on Britney began and ended. When I was reading the book, I learned a lot about Britney that was quite surprising. I mean, one of the most admirable things is this girl really does come from nothing. She didn't have anybody pulling strings for her, helping her to become a star. And we all know that's pretty rare to actually achieve. Most young stars, you'll find they have a connection somewhere. Britney came from a family that suffered from money issues, addiction issues, extremely poor relationships within the family. Her parents had a very volatile marriage. Her mum was a young mum who I think really did love Britney, but had introduced her to drinking with her on day trips by the age of about 12. The one person that Britney did really admire was her grandmother, who she loved the fact that her grandmother had a British accent and she felt very refined. But her grandmother had a very difficult relationship with Britney's grandfather. He was very abusive. She had a number of children, but one of her children died, and she found that extremely difficult to take. She was put on controlled medication to try and kind of, I guess, stifle her emotions and her feelings and her reactions. And eventually she shot herself on the grave of the child she lost. So you can see this taking some very dark turns when we're reading about Britney's childhood. And the saddest thing is you kind of see a cycle that very slowly ends up repeating itself. Britney loses her boys, different way, but she loses her children. She's put on medication to control her emotions. And thank goodness, so far, Britney is still with us, and I hope that she has good people around her that will help her to become well and thrive. But, sadly, her life is quite a reflection, just in a very different contemporary way, to the life that her grandmother led. So we find that Britney is a child full of energy, full of creativity, full of talent. She manages to wow agents. Her mum kind of takes her to all of these different auditions and devotes herself a little bit to helping Britney achieve her dreams. Neither of them, I guess, really know what they're doing. They're off on these road trips. They're drinking alcohol together before Britney goes in for a competition or an audition when she's a young teenager. They've got the baby sister in the back that's already had a perm. It's kind of a very different time I think Lynn Spears treated her girls like almost kind of little tiny adult friends. But it works, and Britney becomes a star against all odds. Now, during this time, Britney also falls in love with Justin Timberlake. And if you remember, it was more or less the breakup between Britney and Justin that seemed to signal things starting to go really wrong for Britney. And Justin Timberlake pretty much managed to convince the world that they'd broken up because Britney had been unfaithful to him and he was the wronged partner. And there wasn't an awful lot of sympathy for Britney. I think people just thought, oh, she's a bit of a wild child. She's a bit flighty. She's her lovely Justin. Nobody really questioned it. But when you read the book, it's her slant is very different. She knew that he was being consistently unfaithful. She'd become pregnant during the relationship, and he encouraged her not to keep the baby. So she had a termination. She wasn't allowed to go to a hospital because that would have caused perhaps media coverage. So she suffered that at home. Again, things turn quite dark from a very sweet Disney style relationship to the kind of relationship that when you're very young and vulnerable emotionally can really, really mess you up for a little while. And unfortunately for Britney, that was happening in public. I think, first of all, she was okay for a little bit. She was kind of playing the field and looking like the cool girl. She was not showing her emotions in public. She was very, very, very deeply hurt and disturbed by things that were happening. But she managed to keep the Disney smile. And I think people had very, very little empathy for Britney at all, really. She was going through a really difficult time. And then eventually she meets Kevin Federline, who is probably the worst kind of partner for somebody who has worked so hard to be a star, right from being a small child. It's difficult, really, to give too much of an informed opinion, but I watched their documentary. They did a little reality show together years ago when they first met. They were both highly annoying in it, to be quite honest with you. But he certainly wasn't the kind of equally talented, go-getting, caring, loving partner that, on a similar level to her, that might have been a better bet. I think his partner was already his previous partner was expecting a baby with him, but I think he saw Britney as an exciting opportunity rather than the love of his life. So Britney kind of gets herself landed with this guy next, and she's still a Southern girl at heart that wants a family and babies and everything, to be really sweet and nice and lovely. So she rushes into having children with him. And it was really sad, actually. By the time she gets to her second pregnancy, he's pretty much shutting her out of his life completely. He's in recording studios. He's feeling like the man. He's getting attention. Goodness knows how many girls or whatever else he's kind of playing. And when Britney turns up to his studio to try and see him, or the studio he's recording in, her own people aren't letting her in because Kevin is leading his life. All of a sudden, he's in the spotlight and he feels like he's going to be a star. Britney has one young baby. She's pregnant. She's exhausted, I'm sure. Not feeling her best, not feeling at her strongest. You feel really vulnerable when you're pregnant, by the way. And when your partner kind of lets you down or isn't there in the way that they should be, I just, I do have an awful lot of sympathy for women in that scenario. It's really difficult because also you have to look after yourself and be at the top of your game, because you want your child to be healthy. So I can only imagine how difficult that was for Britney, no matter how much money she's got or how much help she's got. If emotionally you're being let down again and being made to feel very small and very unimportant, which incredibly Britney's family do to her the entire time through this novel. Sorry, it's not a novel, the autobiography. It's as though no one in Britney's life ever wants her to really feel the strength of her own power, because it's they're in a stronger position if she doesn't, if she feels small, if she doesn't feel worthy. Because if she really took hold of her own power, this woman would be one of the most powerful women on earth at this point. So she's made to feel small by her family and by her husband of the time. We all pretty much know that things go very, very wrong when she breaks up with Kevin Federline. It's another disappointment. It's another, complete lack of validation that she's lovable, that people are trustworthy, people are good, and things go into a pretty fast spiral. But again, is it a spiral or is it just a woman that is feeling really broken? And if there wasn't a media spotlight on her, would people be thinking, "Oh my gosh, this woman's gone mad"? I don't think so. I think it was just because there was such a critical lens on her at all times. Her father steps in and really takes control of everything legally, using a system that is generally used for people who just can't take care of themselves, Alzheimer's sufferers, that kind of thing. So Britney loses all power. Now, you could argue that perhaps that was needed for somebody that was so vulnerable and in the spotlight the way that she was. But you could also argue that this was a horrible miscarriage of justice, that this young woman's basic human rights were taken away from her in many, many, many ways. And why? Because the family, I believe, did not want the money to stop rolling in. And a really damaged Britney that's out there on the loose, tarnishing her reputation day by day, is not going to earn them the millions that they want each year to carry on the lifestyle they've become accustomed to. So Britney very much becomes a kind of a prisoner, but she's kept on the treadmill. She's not allowed to stop. She's not allowed to stop working. She's not allowed to stop watching what she eats. She's not allowed to stop taking the medication they prescribe for her. I do believe that any man that came into her life was vetted by her father and probably on the payroll. It's just such a modern travesty, really. And again, people didn't really question it until the Free Britney movement. And I'm sure a lot of people thought that those involved in the Free Britney movement were just crazy conspiracy theorists, which is what's so dangerous in the world right now. If you don't agree with the mainstream theme, you're a conspiracy theorist. What is that doing to our world? You either, it's black, white, right, wrong. If you happen to, your opinions fall outside of these very, very kind of solid divides, then you're a conspiracy theorist. I think that's really, really dangerous. And I hope that this is an era that we're going to be out of very quickly. So the book ends. Britney is now free, well, kind of. I mean, I think so much damage has been done. I'm not sure that she's really living the life that perhaps she imagined she might do once her father was no longer in control. The husband that had been with her whilst she was under the control of her dad disappeared pretty quickly. Unfortunately, the book ends before he goes. I would just love to know what the true story of that relationship was and what her take on that is. Again, I've heard that he was on the payroll. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's really the only thing that would make sense for him to leave as soon as she becomes free, although on the surface he supported her through her battle to legally become free. So really interesting book to read, much more interesting than I was expecting. I thought it was going to kind of be fluff. I'm sure there was a ghostwriter, but it does really feel like it's Britney's kind of tone, and she's quite funny and she seems to be really honest. Yeah, she's very self-depreciating in a, she's now standing proud about her achievements, but she can say when she was wrong, or she can say when, perhaps she was threw her weight around a little bit unnecessarily when she, stardom first kind of hit and perhaps wasn't the kindest to people. And, she seems to be reflective and she seems to be pretty honest. So I actually enjoyed reading that for, for what it was. And then on the flight back, I read Jada Pinkett's autobiography. And again, this is a woman that you think, you have everything. Why are you complaining about anything? But you just don't realize, the backgrounds that these women came from. She was born into a family where her parents were both addicts. Neither were capable of taking care of her properly. She genuinely was selling drugs on the streets at a very young age, just as a young teenager. She obviously had a lot of charisma and strength at a very young age to try and protect herself and her mom and try to get her own needs met in terms of earning money. She didn't fall into addiction herself. She was very strong and focused. So yeah, you have to remember that even though an adult walking around looking as though they have everything, there's still that huge part of them that is that very, very vulnerable child or young person that is incredibly damaged. So I found that part of the book really interesting. I found as it went on, I kind of lost interest a little bit when it's going on and on about her children and her family. It's interesting, but I much prefer to try and understand who she was, and the first half of the book really conveyed that. And again, it sounds, she may well have a ghostwriter, but it sounds like it's coming from her voice. So just going on to some TV shows, we are always late to the party, and we just started watching The Traitors season 1, the UK version, and we binged the lot. We watched one episode and we didn't really get it. It all seemed a bit contrived, and the thought of a cold castle in Scotland and people, looking pretty miserable a lot of the time, and Claudia Winkleman strutting around like a bad villain. I just wasn't sure if that was for me, but actually I really enjoyed it. And, there were nights where we were just completely shook by what was going on. So I'll just summarize it really quickly. You have a group of contestants. They all arrive at this castle in Scotland. You are told whether you are a traitor, of which there are only 3, or whether you are a faithful. Now, the faithfuls, which are the majority, we'll call them a caste because they are a caste. The majority of the caste are faithfuls, which means they have to work out who the traitors are. And the traitors are able to kill off not literally, eliminate from the show, but they call it a murder. It all gets very dark. They're able to kill off a member of the faithfuls every night. And the idea is that by the end of the show, the faithfuls believe that they've killed all of the traitors. If you're a traitor and you're still there at the end and they haven't killed you off, they haven't guessed that you're a traitor, you win the entire prize fund, or you share it with your fellow traitors that may still be there. If the faithfuls have got all of the traitors out of the show, they then win the prize money. And it was around about 120,000. So what surprised me was this gets really real very quickly. I imagine if I was in a TV show, I would remember it was a game. I wouldn't get quite so emotionally attached, or, start hating these traitors and be desperate to sniff them out and all of this kind of thing. But it's very interesting to watch because people become conditioned really quickly. It's so important that you believe that everybody around you that has become your friend is a faithful and you can trust them. So even though they know that at the beginning, at least 3 of these cast members are traitors, what's quite beautiful really is these people all want to make connections and they want to trust the people around them and they want loyalty. So they almost lie to themselves, like, everyone in this room is a faithful. I trust you. I believe every word that you say. I know 100% that you are a faithful. Knowing full well that 3 of the cast members have been told they're going to be traitors and they've got to do it. So it's quite interesting, and it's quite inspiring that actually you realize it in season 1 anyway. What's most important to people is that they've made real friendships. They want to know that these people really are truthful and loyal, and yes, they just can't comprehend that somebody that they've bonded with could be a traitor. So you see a lot of tears, you see a lot of emotion, and even though I thought that was a little bit over the top, we did really, really enjoy it. And they've got a great way of kind of leaving every episode on this kind of at this point where you have to watch the next episode, and you can find yourself still there at 1:30 in the morning going, oh my God, we've just got to watch one more. So it's not particularly good for your sleep pattern. But we did get that under control. So we watched the whole of season 1. Really dramatic at the end, just in terms of watching what people do to each other. This is the irony of it. The faithfuls, so the people that are not traitors, the faithfuls, the ones that are supposed to be guessing the traitors, all season did not manage to correctly guess a traitor once. The only reason any traitors went out of the show was because the traitors turned on each other. And the only reason these final few faithfuls were left in the show, hadn't been killed off by the traitors, was because the traitors were pretty sure they were incapable of working anything out and would never guess who they were. So it's almost as though the way to survive in this show and to do really well is to appear as though you have not got a clue, you're completely gullible, you're too trusting, and you can't work anything out. Because eventually these three, well, I don't really want to give it away in case you haven't watched it, so watch it. But yeah, it's very interesting. I don't think I could go on the show because people would probably think I was a traitor immediately, because I wouldn't be as emotional as some of them. They'd think, oh, she's very cold and aloof, and it wouldn't be that at all. But I just don't think I could be sobbing about somebody I'd only met for 2 or 3 days. But also, I'd always want to be trying to work things out. So the traitors would kill me off very quickly if I hadn't already been kind of thrown out by the faithfuls as a suspected traitor. So that's that one. Great to watch, especially if you're watching it with other people and you can kind of discuss everything. But equally good to watch alone, because you will find yourself still probably speaking to the telly. And the last one, real joy, that we've watched recently is Alan and Amanda's Italian Adventure. I think that's the correct title. It's Alan Carr and it's Amanda Holden. And they buy properties for €1, which is part of this Italian scheme to repopulate the villages that young people are deserting. Again, this is such an uplifting show about friendship. It really comes down to warmth and friendship in the end, because they get this dilapidated property and Alan and Amanda do it up together, and they have all these people that help them, locals that they kind of make friends with and welcome into the fold. And the locals kind of are so warm and friendly, and they become part of the community whilst they're breathing life into this home that had been abandoned for years. Really, they make a beautiful kind of warm, welcoming space, so another family or a single person can come in and create this wonderful story of their own there. It's just lovely. It's so funny, and their banter together. I don't particularly like them that much separately. I mean, I don't like them, but Alan Carr's chatty man, after a few seasons, it was just like, oh, it's just too much. And Amanda can come across, if you just look at her media image, as a little bit superficial, maybe. But they are actually fantastic. I just think when they're being themselves, just the two of them, and they're just two friends, and they're chatting and pondering on life, and they're so sweet. I just really, really, really enjoyed it. It felt like I was kind of part, the third person in their little gang while they were in Italy. I really, really enjoyed it. So there's 2 seasons of that. If you enjoy spectacular scenery, sunshine, genuine friendship. And Alan Carr was going through a pretty difficult time in season 1, and Amanda's brilliant. She's so warm and supportive. And by season 2, she's really kind of saying, right now, it's your time. And he's worked through a few of his demons, and he's on a bit of a wellness and fitness regime, which is quite funny, because you can imagine he's trying to take it seriously, but he is who he is. So yeah, I definitely recommend that as well if you want some easy fun watching. So that's the end of the podcast for this week. I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Bye bye.